Let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the invisible reality behind the screens we literally stare at every single day. I mean, think about the smartphone in your hand, your TV, or even the massive data centers powering the internet you're using right this second. We almost always focus on the shiny logo on the back of the device, right? But today we're going way deeper. We're decoding the industrial machinery of a company that didn't just build electronics, they actively constructed the very foundation of our modern digital civilization. I'm talking about Samsung. To put that into perspective, the sheer scale of their operation is absolutely staggering. Over 40%. Seriously, even if you've never owned a single Samsung-branded product in your life, there's a massive chance they manufactured the invisible, microscopic foundation of the device you're holding right now. They supply the absolutely critical memory chips that keep global infrastructure running. They are, quite literally, the silent engine room of the entire tech world. Which brings us to the ultimate question we're answering in this explainer. How on earth did a company from a developing nation pull this off? A company that actually started out as a small local trading outfit. How did they execute one of the most unlikely technological transformations in human history? They didn't have some massive inherited tech legacy. No, they had to build the whole shebang from scratch. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll hit rebuilding from ashes, the semiconductor megabet, battling global giants, the secret engine, and finally, the AI frontier. Starting with Part 1, Rebuilding from Ashes, a nation's survival strategy. Let's look at the origins, because honestly, Samsung's future as a global titan was never, ever guaranteed. In fact, their rise is completely tied to South Korea's desperate fight for economic survival. Back in the 1930s, they were just a small regional trading company. Get this, their main exports were actually dried Korean fish, vegetables, and noodles. But then the 1950s brought war and utter devastation. The nation desperately needed to rebuild, so Samsung's aggressive expansion in the 1970s into heavy industry and basic electronics, well, that perfectly mirrored South Korea's urgent strategy to pull itself out of poverty. They moved into complex manufacturing simply because their country needed them to. Now, the absolutely crucial thing to understand here is the concept of the chaebol. Think of a chaebol as a huge, family-owned conglomerate heavily supported by the government. This unique setup is basically the cheat code to unlocking Samsung's history. It allowed them to take massive, terrifying long-term risks for the sake of the national economy. We're talking about bets that a standard, quarterly profit-driven company would literally never be able to justify to its shareholders. Which brings us right into Part 2, the semiconductor megabet, risking everything. So we're in the 1980s, right? And Samsung decides to make this unthinkable pivot that would completely define their future and, frankly, change global tech forever. The contrast is wild. On one side, you have established US and Japanese rivals with decades of dominance and massive profit cushions. And Samsung? They had near zero industry experience. At the time, people just saw them as a maker of cheap, budget appliances. Yet they decided to dive headfirst into semiconductors, a notoriously brutal field requiring insane engineering and billions in capital. Where everyone else saw a saturated, impossible market, Samsung saw an opening. They essentially bet the entire company's survival on microscopic memory chips. And wow, did that gamble pay off? Today, Samsung absolutely dominates the global DRAM and NAND memory chip markets. If you're not a hardware geek, just think of these chips as the short-term and long-term memory brains of basically all your electronics. DRAM is the short-term memory. It's what lets your phone multitask seamlessly without freezing up. NAND is the long-term storage, holding all those photos, videos, and apps. That wild bet the farm gamble in the 80s turned them into the undisputed foundation for the world's smartphones, PCs, and modern data centers. They didn't just enter the market, they completely swallowed it. Moving on to Part 3, Battling Global Giants, from Budget to Premium. Once they had that foundation locked down, Samsung had to prove they weren't just a basic supplier. They had to prove they were a premium innovator capable of going toe-to-toe with the absolute biggest names in the world. Their first target? The Japanese electronics empire. For decades, Japanese companies represented the absolute pinnacle of premium consumer tech. Samsung knew they couldn't just win on being the cheap option anymore. So they systematically took on these giants. They poured relentless investment into premium engineering, massively upgraded their product quality, and launched these brilliant marketing campaigns to completely flip their global perception. They shed that budget label and transformed into a literal status symbol. Then, of course, came the era-defining battle, the smartphone wars. This was a massive clash of two totally different philosophies. On one side, Apple leaned hard into a tightly controlled software ecosystem and a super curated, design-focused user experience. Samsung? They countered with brute force industrial capability. Their game plan was vertical integration, total hardware control, and lightning-fast, rapid iteration. They just flooded the market with different sizes, features, and price points, completely leveraging their manufacturing supremacy to rival Apple's software elegance. All right, part 4, the secret engine, vertical integration. So how exactly do they sustain this kind of hardware supremacy? Well, let's walk through their supply chain. Step 1 is massive R&D investment. Step 2, instead of buying parts from someone else, they use their own in-house manufacturing to build the most incredibly difficult components themselves, things like high-capacity memory chips and those dazzling OLED displays. Step 3 is final device assembly, and Step 4 is global distribution. This level of total end-to-end control means Samsung isn't just making their own phones, they're actually manufacturing the very technologies their biggest competitors desperately depend on to stay relevant. It's wild. Now, of course, an empire this vast has an immense, undeniable impact. Looking objectively at their human and economic footprint, we really see a duality here. On the one hand, Samsung is an absolute economic miracle for South Korea. They drive a massive percentage of the nation's GDP and act as a core pillar of their global identity. But on the other hand, all that power brings intense scrutiny. The company continuously navigates heavy structural criticisms. We're talking issues with family succession, complex corporate governance, and the intense pressures of global economic cycles. The reality of being a chaebol means their challenges are just as supersized as their successes. And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, the AI frontier, an uncertain horizon. Because here's the thing about the tech world, past success absolutely does not guarantee future survival, especially not in today's incredibly fast-shifting landscape. Right now, Samsung is facing a totally new set of existential threats. The battleground has entirely shifted to this intense race for next-generation AI semiconductors. Plus, they're navigating rising geopolitical tensions that directly threaten the complex global supply chains they rely on. They're up against fierce competition from specialized tech giants. And maybe most critically, they are under massive, massive pressure to pivot beyond their dominance in memory chips. They need to try and capture the market for advanced logic processors. You know, the highly complex chips that don't just store data, but actually do the thinking and the heavy calculations required for artificial intelligence. So, as we wrap up this explainer, here is the core takeaway I really want to leave you with. Samsung's true empire, it's not actually the smartphone in your pocket or the slick television on your wall. Their absolute greatest achievement was building the underlying industrial machinery, the giant factories, the armies of engineers, the massive capital investment structures that allows them to literally shape the future of technology. They are the architects of the hardware that our entire digital age runs on. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. They conquered the world by mastering hardware and memory. But in a highly volatile future dictated by artificial intelligence, specialized logic chips, and intricate software ecosystems, can this manufacturing titan adapt quickly enough to keep its crown? Thank you so much for exploring the Silicon Empire with me today. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.
Thanks for watching World Decoded. Make sure to like and share, subscribe, and stay curious.